I want you to just take a second and think about the very last conversation you had today.
Like literally the last one.
Yeah, exactly. Just put yourself back in that moment. Maybe it was a passing greeting with your neighbor as you were, pulling out of the driveway.
Right. Or maybe something a bit more stressful.
Oh, for sure. Maybe it was a super tense, clipped argument over a work project that's been dragging on for weeks.
Or honestly, even just a quick text message you dictated from your car about what to grab for dinner.
Right. Something totally mundane. Because normally, we treat these interactions as entirely invisible. They are just these fleeting bursts of sound or digital data.
They just disappear the second they leave our lips.
Exactly. But I want to ask you a question that might sound, a little absurd at first. What if that interaction you just had wasn't just communication?
Right.
What if it was actual literal architecture?
It completely disrupts the way you view a normal Tuesday, doesn't it?
It really does.
If you start looking at words not as this invisible breath, but as heavy, tangible building materials, the entire world around you suddenly looks very different.
Yeah, you stop seeing yourself as just a passive observer in your life.
Exactly. You start realizing you are an active, daily participant in this massive construction project.
And that profound shift in perspective is the entire mission of our deep dive today.
It's a big one.
It is a huge one. We are unpacking a genuinely mind-bending set of sources today, centered entirely around a specific sermon given by Pastor Carl Heneny Swanbach,
titled, Speak Life, Created in His Image.
Right. And I want to give you, the listener, a quick heads up right at the top, because when I first looked at this title, I completely assumed it was going to be a standard, feel-good motivational talk.
Like a just be nice to people sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Say positive things, have a good attitude, that sort of general moral lesson.
Yeah.
But that is definitely not what this is.
No, far from it. What Pastor Swanbach is doing here is presenting this brilliant, deeply layered exploration of ancient Hebraic linguistics.
And historical sociology, right?
Yeah, and the underlying psychology of how humanity actually functions. The text isn't asking you to just be polite.
Not at all.
It is making the argument that human speech is the fundamental blueprint of reality itself. It treats language as, the highest form of technology we possess.
It basically reframes talking into a literal superpower.
It really does.
So today, we are going to explore this text to figure out how ancient perspectives on good and evil actually play out in our modern everyday conversations.
We're going to uncover why a famous historical teaching about mustard seeds is wildly misunderstood.
Oh man, that part blew my mind. Something you've probably heard a dozen times, just totally flipped on its head.
Absolutely. And by the end of this, we are going to challenge you to look at the invisible buildings your own words are constructing right now.
But to really grasp this, the source takes us all the way back to the foundation of Western literature. We have to start at the very beginning, at Genesis.
Right, because to understand why speech is considered architectural, the text anchors us in the ancient creation narrative.
So it looks specifically at Genesis chapter 1, verse 26.
Where the text says, "Let us make man in our image." And it pairs that with the recurring action of Genesis 1, starting in verse 3.
And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
And God said, that is the phrase right there.
Yeah, that seems to be the absolute linchpin of Swanbach's entire thesis.
It is the core of the argument. In the original Hebrew, the phrase for "in the image of God" is B'Tselem Elohim.
B'Tselem Elohim.
Right. And for centuries, philosophers, rabbis, theologians have endlessly debated what that phrase practically means.
Well, yeah, because God, at least in this text, doesn't have a physical, biological body.
Exactly. So the image isn't about having 2 arms and 2 legs.
Right. It's not a physical resemblance.
So many scholars reduce the concept to intellect. The idea that because we can reason and think abstractly, we are like the creator.
Or morality, right. Like possession of a conscience.
Yeah, or dominion. The unique authority to manage the earth.
And the source agrees that those are all totally valid interpretations. But it zooms in on something much more fundamental.
The missing piece that Swanbach really highlights is the methodology of creation itself.
The how of it all.
Yes, the how. In the Genesis narrative, the universe didn't come into existence because God took out a divine hammer and physically built the stars.
Right, there wasn't a giant workbench.
The text presents a creator who speaks reality into existence. The heavens, the seas, the earth, the light, they were all spoken.
They are the result of articulated intention.
Precisely. So if humanity is made B'Tselem Elohim in that exact image, it means we possess a mirrored capacity.
which is an utterly unique, almost staggering delegation of power when you really think about it.
It is. I mean, unlike animals, which operate primarily on instinct and physical reaction and survival mechanisms,
human beings can take what is completely invisible, like a thought, an abstract idea, a vision in our minds,
and we can pull it into physical reality through language.
Which is wild. And when you look at the broad scope of human history, that premise tracks perfectly.
It really does. The sermon points out that every single tangible human achievement began exclusively as words.
Every skyscraper, every massive corporation,
every hospital, every marriage, every railroad.
None of them started as physical objects.
If you trace the origin of a skyscraper, it doesn't begin with steel beams and concrete.
No, it begins with a conversation.
Exactly. An architect has an entirely invisible idea locked inside their brain.
And they speak it to an engineer.
Right. They draft words and measurements and symbols onto paper, which is really just another form of frozen speech.
Frozen speech, I like that.
And they communicate that vision to investors who then speak to city planners who communicate with construction foremen.
So shared vision is communicated through language, people unite around it, and suddenly what existed only in one person's mind becomes a massive tower of glass and steel.
That permanently alters a city's skyline.
It's incredible. So God delegating this trait to humanity makes speech the ultimate vehicle of human free will and creation.
That is exactly what the text is arguing.
Okay, I am fascinated by this, but I do have to push back a little bit on behalf of the pragmatists listening.
Fair enough. Go ahead.
Because there is a very common phrase we all know, which is, talk is cheap.
Right.
In our culture, we really tend to value the physical doer over the talker. Like, I can talk about building a house all day long.
But until you actually pick up a hammer and start swinging, there is no house.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't physical action ultimately trump speech? Isn't the manual labor the actual architecture?
That is a completely fair critique, and honestly, it's how most of us naturally think, but the source text counters that exact assumption by looking at the logistics of human endeavor.
Okay, how so?
Well, action on any meaningful society-altering scale is literally impossible without the initial spoken vision that organizes it.
So the scale is the issue.
Right. You can pick up a hammer, absolutely. But can you build an entire hospital by yourself?
Definitely not.
Can you lay a transcontinental railroad alone?
No way.
You cannot. Coordinated, complex human action requires a shared language. The speech has to precede the action.
Because without the words, you don't have unity.
Exactly. Without unity, you just have a bunch of individuals swinging hammers in random directions.
Okay, I am trying to picture the relationship between the language and the physical labor here.
Yeah.
It's almost like speech operates like a 3D printer for reality.
Oh, that's interesting. Walk me through how you're visualizing that.
Well, think about how a modern 3D printer works. The physical object it eventually produces, let's say a complex plastic gear or something.
Right.
It cannot exist without the digital file first. The digital code is completely invisible. It's just abstract data sitting on a hard drive somewhere.
Okay, I'm with you.
But when you send that data to the printer, the machine reads the code and extrudes the physical plastic layer by layer to match it.
So the data becomes physical.
Right. Under Swanbeck's theory, our words are that digital code. The physical actions we take, the manual labor, the societies we build, those are just the extruded plastic.
That is a phenomenal modern translation of the B'Tselem Elohim concept.
The physical reality can't exist. Right. It certainly can't hold its shape without the original invisible code of language guiding it.
We are essentially the coders of our own physical reality. But, you know, the moment you accept that analogy, you run into an incredibly heavy realization.
What's that?
Well, if words give us the power to write the code for reality, what happens when we decide to code a virus?
Oh.
What happens when humanity uses this divine architecture, this godlike 3D printer, to build a nightmare?
And that question pulls us directly into one of the most famous and maybe most misunderstood stories in the ancient text.
The Tower of Babel.
Right. Because having the power to code reality isn't inherently safe.
Not at all. The source takes us to Genesis 11 to explore this exact vulnerability.
And the story describes humanity settling in a region called the land of Shinar.
And the text makes a very specific observation about them. It says they had one language, one vision, and one ambition.
They say to one another, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens.
Yeah.
And let us make a name for ourselves."
They were totally, perfectly unified.
And from a modern perspective, I mean, we usually treat unity as the ultimate unquestionable good.
We really do.
Like, if we could all just set aside our differences and come together, we could solve all the world's problems.
Yeah.
That is pretty much the secular gospel of our era.
Which is why the ancient commentary on this passage is so deeply unsettling.
Yeah, let's get into that.
The source draws heavily on the insights of a renowned Jewish scholar, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz.
And he points out something fascinating about God's reaction to Babel.
He does. God looks down at this ancient, unified skyscraper project, and he doesn't laugh at their primitive engineering.
He doesn't say, oh, they don't have the structural integrity to build this.
Right. Instead, God acknowledges the astonishing, almost terrifying power of a unified humanity.
The text actually says, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them.
So the threat wasn't their lack of ability.
And surprisingly, the threat wasn't even their unity itself.
No, the profound issue was what they were united around. The underlying argument in the sermon is that the human heart, when completely left to its own devices, is naturally inclined towards self-glorification.
Toward control and eventually oppression.
Exactly. A perfectly united humanity has the capacity to cure diseases and explore the cosmos, yes.
But history proves that a perfectly united, highly communicative humanity also has the capacity to build massive empires of oppression.
Highly organized societies can systemize segregation, they can industrialize slavery.
And they can collaborate to build weapons capable of vaporizing entire cities in a fraction of a second.
The 20th century alone is a brutal testament to the horrors that highly unified societies can achieve when rallied around a destructive vision.
To really understand why unity can turn so dark, the text dives into the ancient Jewish understanding of good and evil.
Specifically, how those concepts were defined at the time of Christ.
It looks at the Hebrew words tav and ra. And I have to say, this blew my mind because it totally redefines how we casually use the words good and bad.
The linguistic context here changes everything.
Tell me about tav.
So, when God creates the world in Genesis, he repeatedly steps back and declares that it is good. And the Hebrew word is tov.
Okay.
Swanback breaks down the etymology. Tov comes from the Hebrew root tepbet, which literally translates to prepare to receive.
Prepare to receive. That is so different from just being morally nice.
It is. It carries this beautiful connotation of perfect design, functionality, and harmony.
The source mentions the cultural phrase mazel tov here, right?
Yes. Think about mazel tov. It's not just saying good luck.
It's deeper than that.
It's a blessing of good alignment. It's recognizing that things are functioning exactly as they were meant to.
So tov is a state where a system is perfectly prepared to receive and sustain life without friction.
Exactly.
So if tov is harmony and alignment, what is ra? The word we translate as evil.
Well, we have been conditioned by Hollywood to view evil as a cackling villain in a cape.
Right. Some guy tying people to train tracks.
But ra, in this ancient linguistic framework, is simply the absolute absence of tov.
Wow.
It is dysfunction, it is dissonance, hurtful speech, selfish intent, and the breaking of harmony. It is friction in the system.
The source also mentions the term rasha.
Right, which means an evil person. But a rasha isn't necessarily a serial killer.
Yeah.
A rasha is simply someone entirely tuned to the earthly spirit, someone driven by self-preservation, ego, and the fractured ways of the world, rather than the life-giving harmony of the divine.
So let's bring those definitions back to the people building the Tower of Babel.
Okay.
The Torah scholar Rashi has a brilliant translation of what was actually happening on those construction scaffolding.
He meets that if God doesn't intervene and scatter their language, they will do their own will, not his, in both good and evil.
This is the critical nuance of the Babel narrative.
Humanity, even when possessing what they believe to be good intentions, like seeking security or cultural unity,
They can still be entirely bent toward their rasha, their selfish inclinations.
Exactly. Babel was an attempt by mankind to code a reality, to build a secure future, entirely apart from God's authority.
They were essentially saying, we have the language, we have the technological code, we have the unity.
So we are going to build our own version of heaven on earth on our own terms.
Let me try another analogy here because I think I'm grasping why God saw this as a crisis.
Go for it.
I'm picturing human unity like a massive, incredibly complex V12 engine.
Okay.
Just a colossal, roaring piece of machinery. Now, the engine itself is completely amoral.
Right, doesn't care.
It doesn't have a conscience. It doesn't know the difference between Tav and Ra. Its only function is to generate massive amounts of power.
So the danger isn't the engine itself.
Exactly. The danger is the driver holding the steering wheel.
Wow, yeah.
If the human heart naturally drifts toward self-interest and control, then handing that flawed heart the keys to a perfectly tuned, incredibly powerful V12 engine of unity is actually a terrifying prospect.
It really is.
But here's my struggle with this. If our intentions, even our good ones, are naturally tainted by our dysfunction, how do we ever safely build anything together?
Right. How do we collaborate without just building another Tower of Babel?
Yeah.
Well, that tension is exactly where Pastor Swanback pivots the entire sermon.
Okay.
Because he acknowledges a very practical reality. Almost no one listening to his message is going to be tasked with building a literal city or governing a global empire.
True. We aren't out in the desert mixing mortar for a ziggurat.
Right. Most of us are just trying to survive a Tuesday staff meeting without losing our mind.
Exactly. But the scale of the construction project doesn't change the nature of the tools.
We are all building something. We are taking this grand, world-altering power of speech and applying it intensely to our personal lives.
And that introduces a concept the source calls laying bricks.
Laying bricks. We are building homes. We are building marriages.
We are constructing friendships, corporate cultures, and church communities.
Every day, we are building the inner voices of our children. We are building legacies that will outlast us.
And we are doing all of this construction using the exact same material, which is our words.
The sermon uses this incredibly visceral metaphor of your daily vocabulary acting as bricks. Every sentence you utter is laying a brick in the architectural environment you inhabit.
So the question becomes diagnostic. What kind of environment are your words currently constructing?
Do the people around you walk into a room you've built and feel a sense of peace, or do they feel the anxiety of chaos?
Does your language impart courage to your kids, or does it slowly instill a pervasive sense of fear?
The text leans heavily here into a rabbinical concept called lashon hara.
Lashon hara, which literally translates to evil speech or a tongue of evil.
Right. The ancient rabbis, along with Christ in the New Testament, taught that the human tongue has the capacity to completely destroy a human life without ever needing to resort to a physical weapon.
It's the tragedy of slow structural destruction.
Think about how many marriages end. It's rarely one massive theatrical betrayal that brings the house down.
Usually the collapse happens because life-giving, Tav words were slowly, systematically replaced with tiny daily criticisms.
It's the unbuilding of a relationship, taking it apart brick by brick.
Think about adults who are still carrying deep emotional scars or limiting beliefs about themselves because of careless words spoken to them by a frustrated parent or a stressed teacher 30 years ago.
The physical architecture of their self-worth was severely damaged by lashon hara.
This concept brings us to what I honestly found to be the most arresting and maybe the most intimidating quote in this entire deep dive.
What was it?
Pastor Swanback references a popular song by Toby Mac called Speak Life.
Oh, sure.
And he points out that the song was actually inspired by a line from an author named Brennan Manning in his book, The Ragamuffin Gospel.
Okay.
The quote is, "In every interaction we either give life or we drain it. There is no neutral exchange."
There is no neutral exchange. I think we need to let that sink in for a second.
It's heavy.
Because it fundamentally attacks the modern way we lazily drift through our days.
I have to play the skeptic here again. Because while that sounds poetic, it also sounds utterly exhausting.
It does.
Is it practically true? I mean, think about the hundreds of micro interactions we have in a week.
Right.
Is asking a coworker, "Hey, did you get that email?" really a life or death exchange?
That's a good question.
Am I really draining or giving life when I tell my kid to put on their shoes for the 5th time? Surely, in the grand spectrum of human communication, there is a massive middle ground of just neutral data transfer.
It absolutely sounds exhausting if you interpret it through the lens of performance.
Okay, what do you mean?
If you think Manning is saying you need to deliver a profound, tear-jerking cinematic monologue every time you buy a coffee,
Right.
then yes, you will burn out by noon. But the source is pointing to something much deeper than just being overtly chipper.
It's not just about positive thinking.
No, it's looking at the underlying intent, the microtones we use, and the cumulative atmosphere those tones cultivate.
Okay.
Take your example of asking someone to pass the salt at dinner.
Sure.
You can say those exact words with a warm glance that acknowledges the humanity of the person sitting next to you.
Right.
Or you can say the exact same words with a cold, dismissive sigh that subtly communicates they are an annoyance in your space.
Oh, I see the distinction. The data transfer is the same, but the payload is different.
Exactly. It is the payload that matters. Over time, those tiny, seemingly insignificant payloads compound.
They create neural pathways and establish an emotional climate.
This isn't just metaphysical poetry. It's the divined structural reality of human sociology.
Every single conversation acts as a microscopic nudge.
Pushing the other person slightly closer to feeling alive, valued, and seen, or nudging them slightly closer to feeling deadened, isolated, and insignificant.
The source illustrates this compounding effect with a really sobering anecdote about suicide prevention.
Yes.
It talks about how frequently we hear stories of people who were literally standing on the brink of ending their lives.
They were internally asking the universe or God for just one tiny sign that they mattered.
And then a complete stranger passes by and says something totally mundane, but kind. Like, I love your jacket.
Or you have a great smile.
Or simply, have a good afternoon.
A single passing sentence from a stranger possessing enough architectural weight to halt a life or death trajectory.
That is the ultimate proof of Swanbach's thesis.
Proverbs 18:21 explicitly states, death and life are in the power of the tongue.
And the New Testament book of James, chapter 3, uses the imagery of a tiny spark that has the potential to burn down an entire massive forest.
A handful of careless, frustrated words can incinerate years of painstakingly built trust.
But the inverse is also true. The same tongue can heal, validate, and breathe hope into what the Toby Mac lyric calls the deadest, darkest night.
We have established this massive responsibility.
We are walking around with a 3D printer for reality in our mouths.
We are laying bricks of life or death, and there is no neutral exchange.
That is a heavy burden to carry even when life is going great.
It really is.
But what happens when the bottom falls out? What happens when life is genuinely terrible? How are we supposed to use our words then?
This is where the theology of the sermon stops being abstract and meets the brutal pavement of reality.
Because it is incredibly easy to speak life when your bank account is full, your health is robust, and your relationships are thriving.
But Pastor Swanbach asks the harder question. How do we architect our words when we are thrown into the furnace of affliction?
He starts this section by confronting a very famous Bible verse, James chapter 1, verse 2.
Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds.
Now, I'm just going to be transparent here. I have heard that verse quoted my entire life, and usually it feels like a condescending slap in the face.
I can completely understand that.
When your car breaks down, you lose your job, and you're terrified about your mortgage, having someone tell you to just be joyful, well, it feels incredibly toxic. It feels like gaslighting.
It absolutely functions as toxic positivity if it is stripped of its ancient cultural context.
Okay, so what is the context?
The text isn't demanding you feel a bubbly sense of happiness about a tragedy. Swanbach connects this verse to a very specific Hebraic teaching regarding the concept of smelting.
Smelting like in metallurgy.
Yes. Smelting is the brutal process of applying intense melting heat to raw ore in order to extract the pure, valuable metal and burn away the worthless impurities.
Okay.
The ancient teaching suggests that the tribulations you face in this physical world, the pain, the loss, the betrayals, they act as a smelting furnace for your soul.
So the theory is that the more your soul is purified through the heat of this world, the less smelting it will require when it eventually returns to the Creator.
Exactly.
Okay, so the trial isn't just random, meaningless punishment. It has a refining purpose.
Right.
But even knowing that on an intellectual level, standing in the middle of the fire is still agonizing.
Of course it is.
Knowing a workout is good for my muscles doesn't make the pain of the heavy weight disappear.
Which is why the source introduces a vital, incredibly nuanced distinction between two concepts that Western culture usually lumps together into one vague idea.
Okay, what are they?
The sermon looks at the Hebrew words for faith, which is emunah, and trust, which is bitachon.
Bitachon. Okay.
They aren't related, but they are absolutely not synonyms.
Let's break down that difference because it completely changes the way we are supposed to speak in hard times.
Let's look at the default setting first. The world, when facing a furnace of affliction, naturally speaks despair.
The language of the world is, this is hopeless. I am ruined. The system is rigged against me.
Now faith, emunah, steps in and speaks differently. Faith looks at the fire and says, God is still working.
Or, I know intellectually that God has a grand plan, even if I can't see it.
Right. It is a steadfast belief in the ultimate goodness of the Creator, despite the immediate circumstances.
And that sounds like a pretty solid place to be. If I can maintain that level of belief during a crisis, I feel like I'm doing well.
It is a vital foundation. But trust, Bidashan, demands a much deeper level of architecture.
How so?
If faith says, I know God has a plan, trust says, no worries, God's got me. Trust says, my Redeemer lives, and I'm entirely unshakably secure, regardless of what the outcome of this specific trial is.
Pastor Swanback highlights that how we react verbally in the heat of the moment, whether we just got a terrifying medical diagnosis or watched our retirement account collapse,
or found out our child is making destructive choices.
It exposes our true level of Bidashan.
Exactly. Our words reveal whether we are just holding on to an intellectual concept of faith, or if we are actively walking in trust.
I've been thinking about a way to visualize the difference between these two, and I think I have an analogy. Tell me if this accurately captures the dynamic.
Let's hear it.
Let's say you're about to go skydiving for the first time.
Okay.
You are sitting in the airplane, and you are staring at your parachute. Faith, Imuna, is sitting on the bench, reading the parachute manufacturer's manual.
Right.
You look at the packing log, you examine the stitching, and you intellectually conclude, yes, this parachute was packed correctly. The laws of aerodynamics are real. I firmly believe this equipment works.
I see where you're going with this.
But trust, Bidashan, is entirely different. Trust is the moment you stand up, walk to the open door of the airplane, feel the wind rushing past you, and actually throw your body out into the void.
Wow.
It is the active physical surrender to the thing you claim to have faith in. Reading the manual is Imuna. Jumping out the door is Bidashan.
That is a phenomenal, visceral analogy. And here is how that applies to the architecture of our speech. When James says to count your trials as joy, he is not asking you to engage in denial.
He's not telling you to slap a fake plastic smile onto a genuine tragedy.
Exactly. Counting it as joy is the verbal equivalent of jumping out of the airplane. It is the active choice to speak the language of trust into a dark, terrifying reality.
When you choose to speak Bidashan instead of despair, you are essentially refusing to let the temporary trial rewrite the ultimate reality of who you are.
You are laying a brick of light in the middle of the darkness.
But practically, to have the courage to jump out of that plane, to speak life outwardly when everything is falling apart, our internal reality has to be incredibly stable.
That's the catch.
If I'm terrified inside, I can't fake trust outside for very long. To speak life authentically, we have to do some serious internal demolition first.
We absolutely cannot construct a building of life outwardly if our internal foundation is rotting. To address this, the source points to a command given by the Apostle Paul in his second letter to the Corinthians. He says, examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith.
Now, to a modern reader, that just sounds like, think about your choices.
But to a first-century Jewish audience, the command to search and examine the house would immediately trigger a very specific, highly visual cultural memory.
The imagery of Passover, or Pesach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The search for the leaven.
I love the historical layers of this. Let's dig into that ritual.
It's a really powerful ritual. Before the Passover celebration begins, Jewish families engage in a meticulous, exhaustive search of their homes to remove every single crumb of leaven, which is yeast.
This isn't just a light dusting, it's a deep clean.
Every hidden corner, every cabinet, every couch cushion is swept.
And Swanback uses this ancient physical ritual as a direct metaphor for our internal speech.
If we want to speak life, we first have to rigorously search our own hearts and minds for emotional leaven.
We have to sweep out the hidden bitterness,
the deeply rooted pride,
the lingering anger, and any compromises we've made with our own our dysfunction.
We have to get the house completely clean. But the text includes a chilling warning from Christ about the danger of a clean house.
He tells the story about a man who has an unclean spirit leave him.
Right. The man sweeps his house clean and puts it in order, but he leaves it empty.
And because it's empty, the spirit returns, brings 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and the final state of the man is worse than the first.
It illustrates a fundamental law of physics and spirituality. Nature abhors a vacuum.
Removing the leaven, stopping yourself from speaking Lashon Hara, biting your tongue before you say something cruel, is really only half the battle.
If you sweep the toxicity out of your internal dialogue, but you don't fill that new silence with anything of substance.
The negativity will inevitably rush back in, usually with reinforcements.
The empty space you created must be aggressively filled with God's word, his truth, and life-giving concepts.
And the mechanism we use to fill that space leads us to what I think is the biggest aha moment in this entire collection of sources.
Oh, this part is brilliant.
We have all heard the famous biblical teaching about mustard seed faith.
It's everywhere.
If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move, and it will move.
Right.
For my entire life, I have heard this taught exactly one way, that God is so powerful you only need a microscopic, tiny little speck of faith to get things done.
That is the universal modern interpretation. We focus entirely on the physical size of the seed, treating it as a metaphor for a small amount.
But Pastor Swanback points out that this modern reading completely ignores the historical and agricultural context of first-century Judea.
When Jesus was speaking to an agrarian society, they knew exactly what mustard was, and they didn't view it as a delicate little herb.
This flipped my understanding upside down. He explains that in the first century, the mustard plant was notorious.
It wasn't something you politely planted in a neat little row in your garden box.
No, it was an aggressively invasive weed.
Exactly. If a farmer accidentally let a mustard seed take root in his garden, it wouldn't just grow into a polite, contained bush.
It would spread relentlessly.
Its root system would invade everything. It would take over the entire plot of land, dominating the soil and aggressively choking out any other plants that tried to compete with it for resources.
So the point of the teaching wasn't, don't worry, a tiny bit of faith is enough.
Yeah, his point was that true faith is absolutely uncontainable.
That is just wild to me. The metaphor changes from a message of comfort to a message of radical disruption.
Faith isn't supposed to be this tiny, fragile concept that you keep in a decorative little box and only take out on Sunday mornings.
It is supposed to function as an invasive species in your life.
It must spread. It has to aggressively colonize every single aspect of your existence.
It needs to invade your workplace,
dictate your political views,
influence your entertainment choices,
manage your finances,
structure your marriage, and most critically for our topic, it must aggressively govern your speech.
True faith cannot be compartmentalized by neat little boundaries.
The best modern comparison I can think of is planting mint in a backyard garden. Or, if you live in the American South, the nightmare of kudzu.
Oh, kudzu is a perfect example.
You plant a tiny little sprig of mint in the corner of your yard, thinking, oh, this will be nice for some tea.
Right.
And 3 months later, you go outside and the mint has destroyed your tomatoes, completely overrun your lawn, and is actively threatening the foundation of your house.
It ruthlessly refuses to stay where you put it.
That is the exact disruptive energy the source is trying to convey about our spiritual lives.
Mustard seed faith is faith that refuses to be quarantined.
If you plant it in a swept house, it takes over the entire internal garden,
leaving absolutely zero room for the leaven of bitterness, fear, or worldly anxiety to return.
It fills the vacuum completely.
Okay, so let's track the progression here.
Right, let's recap where we are.
We've recognized the architectural power of our words. We've chosen trust over despair in the furnace.
We've swept the internal house clean of bitterness, and we've planted this invasive, uncontrollable kudzu faith to fill the space.
Now, the text demands that we treat this newly structured house as something profoundly sacred.
Which brings us to the writings of Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16.
Where he asks the believers, "Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you?"
Pastor Swanback leans very heavily into what the concept of a temple meant in antiquity.
Because we think of a temple today as basically a community center with a steeple.
Right.
But the physical temple in Jerusalem was understood to be the literal, localized dwelling place of the Creator's presence on earth.
And because of the weight of that reality, every single detail regarding the temple mattered immensely.
No, everything was regulated. The garments the priests wore, the vessels they used, the metals involved.
Because everything associated with it had to be kiddush.
Kadosh, a Hebrew word meaning set apart, holy, or consecrated for a specific, elevated purpose.
If any part of the temple was defiled by something common or unclean, it required an intense purification process.
So Swanback applies this ancient standard to the individual. If we are the living, breathing temple of God, the source demands we take a ruthless inventory.
What is entering our temple?
What media are we allowing in through our eyes?
What conversations are we absorbing through our ears?
What ideas are taking root in our minds?
But the crucial pivot of the sermon, tying everything back to the architecture of our language, isn't just about what we consume.
No, it's about what exits the temple doors.
The source quotes Matthew 15:11, where Christ tells the crowds, "It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth, this defiles a man."
Because the mouth is the ultimate revealer of the heart's actual condition.
You can fake holiness in your consumption, but your tongue will eventually expose exactly what is sitting on the altar of your internal temple.
If words of bitterness, gossip, or cruelty consistently come out, it is undeniable proof that bitterness is the reigning deity inside.
And this realization leads us directly into what I consider the absolute hardest, most uncomfortable challenge of this entire deep dive.
It really is.
It is the ultimate test of whether or not we are truly operating in the B'Tselem Elohim, the image of God.
It is the ultimate crucible of speaking life.
Yes, the challenge of speaking life in the places where we least want to.
The sermon lays out a very harsh reality check. It is incredibly easy to speak life to people who already agree with us.
Right. It takes no spiritual effort to bless our friends or encourage our children when they are behaving.
Or to praise someone who just complimented us.
But the true test of this divine architecture is the difficult coworker who takes credit for your work.
It's the political opponent who stands for everything you despise.
It's the family member who actively, intentionally hurt you.
It's the rebellious child. It's the neighbor who mocks your beliefs.
The sermon looks at the listener and asks, can you lay a brick of life there?
This is the absolute crucible of the entire message. Swanbeck essentially argues that anyone can curse the darkness.
It takes zero divine code, zero B'Tselem Elohim, to hurl an insult at someone who just insulted you.
That is just mammalian instinct. It's a completely natural, biological reaction to an attack.
But the calling of the temple is different. Children of God are commanded to bring light.
That is where the image of God shines the absolute brightest, when it operates contrary to the laws of natural human reflex.
Now, I am going to be totally honest. Reading this section made me genuinely frustrated.
I'm not surprised.
It feels almost unnatural. In some cases, it feels incredibly naive.
How so?
If I am dealing with someone who is toxic, who is actively tearing me down or perpetuating evil, speaking life to them feels like I'm giving them a free pass.
Right.
It feels like I'm ignoring justice, enabling their abuse, and just forcing myself to be a spiritual doormat. It feels like toxic positivity masquerading as holiness.
That is a very raw, very human reaction, and it's exactly the tension the text intends to provoke.
Okay, so how does it resolve that?
Well, the resolution the source offers is profound, and it requires careful parsing. Speaking life to an enemy or blessing someone who abuses you is absolutely not the same thing as endorsing their actions.
It is not abandoning your boundaries or saying that what they did was acceptable.
Exactly. Yeah. Then what is it? It is the radical act of remembering a fundamental, unalterable truth. There is not a single pair of human eyes you can ever look into that God does not love.
Wow.
The sermon references the teaching, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.
So when you are faced with someone radiating raw dysfunction, anger, cruelty,
and you choose to speak life, even if that life is just speaking the hard truth with calm dignity instead of vitriolic rage.
You are transcending their darkness.
You are refusing to let their brokenness dictate your vocabulary.
You are remaining anchored in the realm of Toph.
Preparing to receive harmony even when they are throwing chaos at you.
In that moment, you're acting like the creator of the universe, rather than just reacting like a creature of the earth.
That is exactly it.
That is a staggering standard to try and live by. And it perfectly transitions us into the final diagnostic questions Pastor Swanbeck poses to his audience.
He asks, ultimately, what image are we reflecting to the world around us?
Are we reflecting the image of Babel? Are we using our words to unite with our tribal groups around our own self-interest, our own political factions, and our own earthly desire for control?
Or are we reflecting the image of the Creator, utilizing our words to pull the invisible principles of the kingdom of heaven into physical, earthly reality?
He asks these incredibly piercing questions that feel custom-built for our current cultural moment.
Have politics become our actual gospel?
Has the constantly shifting culture become our final authority?
Have our temporary emotions entirely replaced our commitment to obedience?
He is urgently calling the listener to recognize that The original term for the path of following Christ was never meant to be reduced to merely an intellectual set of beliefs you agree with.
It is an active process of becoming.
It is about becoming a living mobile temple, becoming a carrier of divine presence, becoming an architect who builds with the vocabulary of life.
And as I read that, the pragmatist in me flared up again.
Really?
Yeah, I thought, this is beautiful poetry, but it's a utopian pipe dream. Nobody can actually live like this in the real world.
But to prove that living this way is not only possible, but historically verified, the sermon concludes by reading from an ancient document called the Letter to Diognetus.
This is such a fascinating, brilliant piece of historical evidence to bring into the sermon.
The Letter to Diognetus is an anonymous, early Christian apologetic text. Historians generally date it to the late 2nd century.
It was written to a high-ranking pagan Roman official named Diognetus, who essentially asked the author to explain who these strange, bizarre people called Christians were and why they acted the way they did.
We have to look closely at how this letter describes them, because it perfectly, practically encapsulates Swanbach's entire thesis about the architecture of life.
The author starts by pointing out how normal they appear on the surface.
He says Christians are entirely indistinguishable by their clothes, their language, or their customs.
They don't live in weird, isolated communes out in the desert.
They live in their own native countries, but they live there as if they are only passing through.
The exact quote from the author is striking. They play their full role as citizens, but labor under all the disabilities of aliens. Any country can be their homeland, but for them, their homeland, wherever it may be, is a foreign country.
I love this imagery. It is the ultimate dual citizenship analogy.
Think about what it means to be a dual citizen residing in a foreign nation.
You might be living and working in that country. You pay their taxes, you obey the local traffic laws, you participate in the economy.
But your true allegiance, your passport, and the ultimate laws you answer to belong to your true home country.
For these early believers living in the brutal, violent culture of the Roman Empire, their true home was the invisible kingdom of heaven.
Therefore, the laws of heaven, which demand a radically higher standard of love, mercy, and speech, completely superseded the cultural norms of whatever Roman city they happened to be living in.
And look at the paradoxes the letter outlines to Diognetus to prove this point. Obedient to the laws, they yet live on a level that transcends the law.
The author writes that they love all men, but all men persecute them.
They are condemned, yet they rejoice.
They are put to death, but through it, they are raised to life.
They are totally destitute, stripped of their rights and property, but they possess an internal abundance that the empire can't touch.
And here is the culminating line. The sentence that ties this entire deep dive back to the daily, practical architecture of our speech.
A blessing is their answer to abuse, deference their response to insult.
That sentence right there is the historical, empirical proof that Pastor Swanbach's sermon isn't just theoretical theology.
These concepts weren't just hypothetical ideas debated in a classroom.
There was an entire, massive community of people living in the middle of the unforgiving, blood-soaked Roman Empire who actually lived this code out.
When they were abused by the culture, they didn't resort to Lashon Hara.
They didn't build a massive retaliatory Babel of political power.
They used their words to continue building the invisible kingdom of God.
They answered abuse with blessing.
They spoke the reality of life into the deadest, darkest night of the ancient world.
So after covering all of this ground, what does this actually mean for us today? Let's trace the incredible journey we've just been on.
We started before the construct of time even existed, observing the Creator speaking the physical universe into existence, pulling the reality of light from the invisible void.
We examined how he delegated that exact same architectural power to us, giving us the B'Tselem Elohim, the image of God.
Allowing us the staggering ability to literally code our physical realities, build our relationships, and construct our societies through the specific words we choose to vocalize.
We looked unflinchingly at the terrifying danger of the Tower of Babel.
We realized that human unity, when it is driven by our own earthly desires and our own rasha, leads inevitably to destruction and oppression.
We learned the hard truth that every single sentence we speak is laying a brick, building a tangible environment of either life-giving tov or chaotic raw.
We confronted the deeply uncomfortable reality that in human interaction, there is no such thing as a neutral exchange.
Every single conversation, every glance, every text message either imparts life or drains it away.
We explored the critical difference between just sitting in the airplane, reading the parachute manual, which is emunah, or faith.
And having the courage to actively jump out the door into the wind, which is bitachon or trust.
And we learned that this trust is most vital when we are locked in the smelting furnace of life's painful trials.
We challenged ourselves to meticulously search our inner temples, to sweep out the hidden leaven of bitterness and pride.
And to fill that empty space by planting an aggressive, invasive, kudzu-like mustard seed faith that refuses to be contained and takes over every corner of our existence.
And finally, we confronted the ultimate, most difficult test of our architecture.
Looking directly into the eyes of someone who actively opposes us.
Remembering that the Creator loves them as much as He loves us.
And choosing to transcend their darkness by speaking life anyway, operating like an alien citizen of a higher kingdom.
It is a profound, comprehensively life-altering perspective on an action we perform thousands of times a day without a second thought.
Your words are not just fleeting breath.
They are the heavy, durable tools of creation.
So, as we sign off today, I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought. A question to carry with you into the next conversation you have and the rest of your day.
It's a big one.
I want you to vividly imagine something. If every single word you've spoken over the last 24 hours instantly materialized into physical architecture around you, what kind of city would you be standing in right now?
Take a look around.
Would you be standing in a beautiful sanctuary of peace, a hospital of healing, a place where people feel safe and valued?
Or would you be standing in the middle of a chaotic, crumbling Tower of Babel, surrounded by the sharp rubble of careless, frustrated words? That is an incredibly sobering visualization to sit with.
It is confronting. But the incredibly good news, the profound grace in all of this, is that your construction project is not finished.
You are still on the site.
And you get to lay a brand new, intentional brick the very next time you open your mouth. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.